it's Girls Camp. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and I am joined today by Amanda Montell.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
So happy to have you here.
Long time coming.
I know. When moving to LA, I was like, I hope I can get Amanda. And here we are.
Here we are, and we're neighbors.
That's
kismet.
Which is so nice,
Yes.
Especially because asking someone to come to my home in LA, I'm like, that could either be an hour and a half or 5 minutes. So I'm glad it was 5 minutes for you. So glad.
No, I saw that zip code and I was like, hell yeah.
It's the best. And we were just talking about East Side LA. It's so great over here.
It's
so
my culture.
I love it. Amanda Montell is a New York Times bestselling author, linguist, and Webby Award-winning podcaster. She's the author of Wordslut, Cultish, and the Age of Magical Overthinking, and the host of the hit podcast Sounds Like a Cult and Magical Overthinkers. Her work explores language, belief, and the psychology behind why we think the way we do. And I'm so excited to have you here. I feel like there is so much overlap in the work that you do and in the things that I talk about here on the Girls Camp podcast.
Absolutely.
And I was just telling you before we jumped on the mics that I had the best problem in preparing for this episode, which is like, I feel like we could talk about a million things for a million hours. So I was like trying to pare it down, but I think we have a lot to talk about.
Let's get into it.
The first thing I wanted to ask you is, language is kind of the through line through your work. What drew you to studying language in the first place?
Well, I was always a linguistically minded child before I knew what the study of linguistics even was, and I didn't until I got to college. But I was always fascinated, even as a little kid, with the relationship between language and identity and community and power, how speaking in a certain accent could incite a certain feeling in other people or treatment of me. I mean, my favorite book when I was a little kid was my handy dandy pocket thesaurus. I was just like fascinated by words and accents and foreign languages and how dipping into a certain linguistic identity could affect the way that you moved through the world. I didn't know that there was a formal way to study those things, and these fascinations I would later learn could really be encapsulated by the field of sociolinguistics, where sociology and linguistics intersect. Yeah, but then I got to college and I signed up for a linguistics 101 class. I can't even recall why. I must have read the little course description, and I remember, I showed up for the first day, and the professor really defied the stereotype of what I guess I thought a linguist would be. I really saw myself in her. She was like this small, freckled, nerdy girl who studied Quechua, which is an indigenous language in Peru. I was like, oh my God, what? How did you get into that? And one of the first exercises she had us students do was to come up to the board and write down a sound that was difficult for non-native English speakers to pronounce. And that was just like a small, nerdy, niche little exercise. But I was like, oh my God, these are the things that I like to think about, like speech production and like, I don't know, just these things that kind of only word nerds think about. I was like, oh my God, I found my community. And then when I learned about the field of sociolinguistics, particularly the relationship between language and gender, I was like, wow, this subject matter isn't just like tickling my geeky brain. It's also politically urgent, and it has like very real world implications. And so I wrote about language, gender, and power in my first book, Wordslut, which is kind of this like quick and dirty crash course in feminist sociolinguistics for people who have not necessarily a background in linguistics. And then I explored the relationship between language and power further in cultish, but in the context of cults and cult-ish groups.
Yes. I feel like you're touching on this a little bit, but I'm curious, what about language specifically feels like such a useful and powerful lens to look at human behavior?
It's something that we all use, we all communicate somehow, most of us verbally. And we really take it for granted. I mean, we pick up language as soon as we come out of the womb, effectively, and we don't often stop to think why it's working the way it does, the effects that other people's language choices are having on us. Some feedback that I often get from people, particularly who read Wordslut, is that it's the linguistics research in that book kind of articulates empirically frustrations they'd always had about gender inequality and how it manifests in everyday life, but that they were never able to identify before. But we have linguists for that. And so, yeah, it's this thing that we take for granted. We learn it organically. And yet language doesn't just reflect our reality. It really creates our reality. It perpetuates our reality. And I'm just fascinated in these like invisible ways that the words we use every day are controlling our behavior and shaping who we are.
Yeah, that's interesting because it does feel like something that is just taken for granted until you take one step back. And I think that's what's so compelling to me about your work is you take one step back and you realize, oh, this actually reveals so many things. And like you said, even shapes so many things.
Yeah.
And there's all of these underlying things going on with our language that I feel like, you just speak and you're not really thinking about why you're speaking the way you're speaking or why people are perceiving you certain ways based on the way you're speaking.
Yeah. Another reason why I love using language and linguistics to talk about heavy topics or politically fraught topics is because everybody's curious about language. We all want to know why we talk the way we do. There's a reason why little like dialect quizzes on the New York Times. There was like this New York Times accent quiz that was so popular like 10 years ago.
That. Yes.
Remember?
Yes.
Everybody and their mother took it. Everybody secretly has sociolinguistic curiosities. They just don't know that consciously. And so I find that I'm able to have like pretty delicate conversations with people about gender, politics, etc., through the lens of language, and everyone is much more amenable to that. For example, I could get on a soapbox and preach about how it's sexist for men to perceive women as ditzy because we use upspeak or ending a declarative sentence in the upward intonation of a question or using like every other word. Or I could bring up a fun fact about how linguists, including Carmen Fott from Pitzer College, have discovered that there are actually 6 different forms of the word like, and they're all homonyms, just like the verb to watch and the noun watch, like the timepiece on your wrist, are homonyms, and how there's the discourse marker and the discourse particle and the adverb and the verb and the quotative like, and how they all serve these different purposes. And did you know that young Southern California females, Valley girls, really only pioneered and perpetuated one of these likes, and it's the quotative like, which you would hear in a sentence like, and I was like, and she was like, and that's actually really useful because it allows you to quote an interaction without having to do it verbatim. You just get to relay the feeling of what was said. And I'm just like, isn't that cool, And then I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And now all of a sudden we're having a cool conversation about language and gender. It's just that it felt like a fun fact that nobody could possibly be offended by.
Yeah, it's a Trojan horse.
It's a Trojan horse.
My mom and I were just talking about Trojan horses because she just watched the Odyssey.
Yeah.
She didn't know the term Trojan horse until watching the Odyssey. And she's like, oh, Trojan horse. And yeah, that serves as I think a really great Trojan horse because you're like, oh, isn't this interesting? And then you can kind of expand into what are the implications of that. All right, I'm going to need you to listen closely because I am doing a giveaway with Balesa where every single one of you can get a free spicy toy. And not just any spicy toy, but one of my personal favorites and a fan favorite as well, for good reason. It is the Rose Suction Toy. This thing is amazing. It has 10 different modes. It is rechargeable, splash proof. It is super powerful, really small, fits into the palm of your hand, so you're in complete control, and it's super cute, which I think makes a big difference. If you haven't heard of Balesa yet, let me tell you about them. They are a by women but for everyone company whose mission it is to empower you to explore, embrace, and celebrate your own pleasure. Obviously, I'm a huge advocate for that, and I know so many of you are too. You may have seen their famous Air Vibe, which is a little red dual stimulation toy with a cute charging case, or their new Whisper collection, which has some incredibly powerful and satisfying vibrators that are completely silent, which comes in handy, as you can imagine. Of course, I had to hook all of you up, so my friends at Bellessa and I are sending out a free rose suction toy with every single order. You heard that right, a free rose suction toy. The rose suction toy retails for $99, but you can get it for free. All you need to do is head to the link in the episode description or head to bbvibes.com/girlscamppodcast. That's bbvibes.com/girlscamppodcast. I was so truly changed by Wordslut. I came to Wordslut. Actually, my friend JC, shout out JC, she listened to the book herself. She's a podcaster, and she has a podcast where it's her and her best friend. And they speak about pop culture. They speak about a whole bunch of things, but she speaks for a living. And she was like, Haley, you have to listen to this. She also grew up in Arizona. She also grew up Mormon. I grew up in Provo, Mormon. So we have, I think, similar speech patterns as well. And I was at this point in girls' camp where I had built enough of a following where I was starting to get a lot of reviews that were talking about the way I spoke. And they were saying, oh, you know, love the podcast, but gosh, listening to this upspeak is just, you know, it's grating on the nerves. Or the vocal fry. I use upspeak, vocal fry, like all of these things that you explore in Wordslut. And I was to a point where I literally was considering hiring a coach so I could speak differently. And then I read your book. I feel like I'll cry. I'm not even joking. I feel like I'll cry because I read your book and I was like, it's okay that I speak this way.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to speak this way. And I don't need to change the way that I speak.
No.
So I have lots to talk to you around that. And the first thing I want to ask is, why do you think society, talking about upspeak, using like all of these, you know, feminine vocal patterns, why does society view those as bad or less than ways of talking?
I mean, these speech qualities aren't even necessarily inherently feminine. They're just noticed.
Which you talk about as well.
Yeah, they're just noticed and reviled and critiqued publicly in women a little bit more. Of course, just because of, you know, the slim margin for error for women who dare to speak in public. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of male podcasters who use tons of vocal fry. There just isn't the same microscope on their speech because largely we expect and accept when men occupy public speaking roles. And, you know, that we can see that in the numbers, like which types of podcasts are the most popular, which I'm already saying it, which pundits are the most listened to. You know, it's men. And I can think of a man or two, Jordan Peterson, who have the most grating voices. Objectively, they are tough to listen to, but their voices are not critiqued in the same way. So yeah, women have to walk this very slim tightrope of gender expectations where, you know, if we dare to speak in public, and I'm not just talking about podcasters or public speakers, I'm also talking about, you know, women who give a presentation at work in a male dominated field, we have to, you know, toe this line where we're expected to seem, you know, likable and demure the way that a woman is supposed to be, but also assertive and self-confident the way that someone speaking in public is meant to be. You know, there are some women who've really done that well in public. I think Oprah's done that really well vocally. I'm trying to think of some others who've really crushed it. There are a few, but I can think of way more women in positions of public power who have just been absolutely censured for their voices, you know, cackling Hillary Clinton, Kamala's giggle. You know, there are just so many ways to really critique a woman through like just acting like objectively her voice isn't good enough.
I appreciate you pointing that out, because one of the big paradigm shifts around that way of speaking was that, like, I feel like the word like is so traditionally associated with the Valley Girl.
Yes.
I like did this and I like did that. I just watched Love Island. Are you a Love Island watcher?
I watched a little bit.
Okay. I was noticing how they spoke. There was a lot of likes across the board. The female contestants and the male contestants. From what I noticed, I wasn't tracking, they were both using like.
Yeah.
And I've noticed this as I edit my interviews with people. I'll pay attention to how people are speaking. And like you're saying, men use like just as frequently in my anecdotal experience as women. And yet...
No, empirically they do too.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
It's just that there are certain types of likes that women sometimes use more, such as the quotative like.
Gotcha.
But I love that one. Again, how useful. And I was like, and she was like, it's like, I'm not quoting verbatim. I'm just conveying the feeling of the conversation. And ironically, studies have also shown that speech lacking in discourse markers, some are known as filler words, such as like, is perceived as too stilted. So it's like, wait, what do you want? What do you freaking want? But I will say too that like there are some languages in the world where if we're talking vocal fry, which is this quality most famously attributed to Kim Kardashian, where your vocal folds are so relaxed and they like vibrate really, really quickly. There are certain languages where that speech quality is actually required in certain phonological environments. A word would be mispronounced if you didn't use it. And in linguistics, vocal fry is technically called creaky voice.
Okay.
So it's not inherently bad or inauthoritative. In fact, some studies that I quoted in Wordslut found that oftentimes women will drop into the register, or they might drop into the register of vocal fry to convey authority because it is technically lower pitched. So yeah, I mean, we can project all that we want onto the speech of young women who linguists have found are actually our culture's linguistic innovators, but that really has more to do with our stereotypes of young women themselves than the speech.
Than the actual speech.
Yeah.
Well, and that was another huge part of that paradigm shift. Not only is that language not inherently bad, it can also be incredibly useful.
Oh, yeah.
And you're speaking around some of these ways that those vocal patterns can be useful. I would love for you to talk more about that.
Sure.
How do things like upspeak, vocal fry, like the quote, what are you calling it? The quote?
The quotative like.
Okay, so that's when someone would say, he was like this.
Yes.
As opposed to the exact quote he said was
Yes,
XYZ.
exactly.
Okay, so how can those things actually be useful in speech?
Plenty of linguists have conducted empirical studies on these individual things, and God bless them, because they're so sort of dismissed and seen as frivolous. Like, this is just girl speak, who cares? But linguists have found that, you know, with upspeak, for example, women might use upspeak to invite others into a conversation. There have been studies showing that women oftentimes, when speaking with other women, speak in the style of a jam session where there are a lot of like minimal responses and collaboration. And that really signals like active participation in a conversation versus just kind of like trading minute-long monologues. I also want to say that like particularly young women of color are found consistently to be the drivers of language. And if you want to hear what language will sound like in a year or 2 years or 3 years, just pay attention to how young Black women are speaking on TikTok. I mean, language is changing faster than ever because of the internet and globalizations, so many of these factors. And I have observed in real time how AAVE, African American Vernacular English, which has always driven slang, by the way, like slang terms as old as 24/7, or the use of bad to mean good. These are old, decades old examples, but I have seen AAVE spread faster than ever on TikTok. When I was writing Wordslut, I included a footnote about the grammatical usage of habitual be, which is like he, be, X, Y, and Z, which now is so commonly used. It was not that commonly used when I wrote Wordslut, which came out in 2019. But habitual be, which again derives from African American Vernacular English, and for the longest time was seen as just grammatically incorrect. It's this incredibly useful grammatical tense where you're able to use, he be or she be to describe something that a person habitually does. So like, if why am I going to use my own name in this example? If Amanda like wears pink all the time, like Amanda be wearing pink, versus like Amanda is wearing pink, that's present tense. It's so useful. And the culture has finally discovered that and picked it up. And that's true of not just grammatical tenses, but so many slang words. And by the way, now that I think about it, and I don't think I've ever articulated this point, so bear with me. It is astounding how quickly our culture has picked up habitual be from African American vernacular English, and yet still people are out here claiming grammar as the defense for why they can't incorporate gender neutral singular they into their vocabularies.
Fantastic
I'm just like,
point.
if you can do it with a whole new grammatical tense, you can do it with singular they. And this brings me to my pet peeve, which is that, we adopt the language of queer communities of color, and sometimes forget to give credit where credit is due. But when folks who vote against the rights of these people use the linguistic products of their creation, that's a problem. So anyway, that's part of why I do the work that I do, because I want people to be fascinated and curious by the way that language is moving and the way that it works, and also understand where it comes from so that you can make better decisions about how you talk, maybe, or how you might not want to change in your case. Or maybe, language can be what opens a new political door for you.
Absolutely. And understanding where your language comes from can open up that very necessary appreciation and understanding for maybe communities that certain people are not appreciating in the first place, and realizing that they've adopted these things without even realizing them. These speech patterns, that's really powerful to point out to someone who may otherwise, have certain attitudes about certain things. I think that's a huge inverse too, because I was thinking as you were speaking a lot about formality versus informality, and how it feels like so many of these language patterns you're talking about, they're not the formal way of speaking, correct? And you're saying, well, probably eventually they even will become that way. Mm-hmm. But why is that the hierarchy? Oh, because that's informal, it is therefore less than. I think people sometimes associate with like, for example, women who use like, they're not as intelligent as people who don't speak that way. But then that causes one to consider, well, who's the one saying this is formally the correct way?
That's right.
Or not?
That's right. I have a few things to say in reaction to that. One of them is that the comedian Jacqueline Novak has a very, very funny joke. I don't know if you've seen it, where she talks about how, and I'm going to butcher quoting it, but listen to this. She's basically like,
there you go.
My intellect is a river and my likes are just rocks in the river, ensuring that you as the rafter headed down the stream of my intellect don't go too fast, or my river of intellect is going too fast. You need to slow down.
I'm going to let you catch up to how smart I fucking am.
Catch up. If I were talking about likes, you couldn't understand a word I'm saying. And she has a very funny metaphor for that involving rocks and a river, and you should look it up.
Obsessed.
But grammar and proper grammar is not an objective measure. It was determined by white male grammar guide makers and lexicographers. I mean, now the people who write dictionaries, lexicographers, their job is to reflect common usage. So they're not determining from on high what word definitions are. Their job is to reflect how we as the everyday speakers decide grassroots to use certain words. So there is that. But standard grammar was decided in a ultimately elitist, classist, racist, sexist way, if I may dare say. It had to come from somewhere. And grammar, as a standard formal thing, didn't even exist until widespread literacy, or people needed a convention to follow to be understood in writing. Yeah, and someone, and not just anyone, wrote those guides. So speaking with formality, specifically in the US, is also associated with the American dream. It's like, if you want to ascend class, you better learn how to speak like those rich white people, those rich white men. And if you don't sound like them, that is, by a certain jump in logic, a rejection of the American dream or the patriarchy or whatever. And that doesn't sit well with certain people. But there's also the notion of covert prestige that certain sociolinguists have described, where in a certain community, it's actually more prestigious in certain contexts to speak the less formal way as a way to like ingratiate yourself with that community. So, you know, if I were to go back to my hometown or to my husband's hometown, which is in like rural Maryland, and speak with like perfect, like Chicago style, like standard American grammar, I don't think I would be as accepted by that group. You know, that I would do a lot better socially if I were to code switch and speak in a Baltimore accent, kind of, you know, read the room and pick up what they're putting down. And that is a skill that marginalized people have, you know, specifically speakers of African American vernacular English code switch as a way to, you know, survive socially and thrive socially. And that should be a skill to which we should all aspire. Linguistic flexibility versus pedantry. Why not? Why shouldn't we all speak in as many languages and dialects and registers as we can? It's such a cool skill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually want to give you a Mormon example I've been thinking about.
I'm begging for it.
And I would love to hear your reaction to this phenomenon. There is something that Mormons jokingly refer to as either Relief Society voice or Sister Missionary voice. Relief Society is the name of the women's organization in the Mormon Church, and Sister Missionaries, that's what they call the female missionaries. And it is a higher register. It is often used when women are speaking about something spiritual, and they speak quieter, more gently. And women are made fun of for this. I went on a mission myself, and it was kind of like, oh, you know, she went into her sister missionary voice. Why do you think that happens, and what do you think that says about Mormon culture?
So I have heard something very similar described in evangelical culture, where women will slip into this breathless, sort of strained voice, and both breathless and breathy, technically. And it's feminine. It's a little bit tense. It's holding back, but it's also passionate. And I think it's an attempt to balance. And that's a little bit different from what
Fundy voice
you're describing.
Is that what, do you know the term for that? I'm trying to think if I've heard of it.
I didn't hear a label for it, but it was a journalist who was describing it to me.
Okay. Similar, super similar, I
very
think, to
similar.
what I'm describing. Yeah.
I think it's an attempt, again, to balance what I was talking about before, whereas like you're speaking in public, you're on a mission, or you're, you know, interfacing with other people, and you're speaking from a place of, if not authority, you're like a conduit for a certain authority, and thus that gives you a certain level of jurisdiction. But you've also got your gender expectations in the back of your mind. And as an attempt to negotiate those two things, this freaking voice comes out. It's like customer service voice, right? Like when women put on a customer service voice. And I guess men do it too, but not to the same degree, I feel. And I think, again, it is that attempt at navigating these extremely rigid gender standards with this public job that you have to do. And so, yeah, we can, it's almost similar to like hypercorrection, you know, like, you know, when people will overshoot the mark grammatically in an attempt to follow a grammar rule to sound fancier, but then they actually end up breaking the rule. Like when you say like, oh, just between you and I, but it's actually technically between you and me.
But they think the you and I
is correct because it would be in the subject part of the sentence.
Yes.
It kind of reminds me of that a little bit. We're just like overshooting or like missing missing the mark in an attempt to navigate these like really tough expectations.
Yes. Well, there's a part in your book in Wordslut. So I actually found my notes from years ago when I read it, and they bless my heart. I was just like probably at the gym listening and hurriedly jotting
awesome.
something down. But I wrote down something about how you said women are basically being punished for their own oppression. And I think that feels so resonant to me because you learn to speak a certain way in order to try and fit within that very tricky space where, okay, I want to have some authority, but I can't be too authoritative.
Right.
And then you speak that way and then you get made fun of for it.
Yep.
And same with so many of these vocal patterns. And I feel like this Relief Society voice feels like such an example of that. I mean, I can even say it's a bit annoying. I've spoken that way myself. I do find it kind of annoying, but it also makes sense.
Yeah.
What these women are trying to do, they're trying to do something really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are all entitled to our linguistic pet peeves, by the way. Like, we're only human. It's so fun and easy to judge people for the way that they speak. However, one of the gifts of studying linguistics is that, like, it allows you to turn that judgment or pedantry or curmudgeonliness into curiosity. It's like there's always a reason why people talk the way they do. And that reason is usually really interesting. It's interpersonal, it's complex, and it invites you to question, why do you talk the way you do? Like, what factors in your life, broad factors, small factors, like who your best friend was growing up, what the religion you grew up in is, like all those things. How did they shape the way that you speak? Because we don't speak the way that we do for no reason.
Absolutely. I also have a Utah accent, as has also been pointed out to me.
I think the first time I ever heard a Utah accent was there was a family friend growing up who had it, and it was so curious to me. I just remember the way that she would say the word family. Like, it's super nasal in kind of like standard English, but in the Utah accent, it's like family. It's like less nasal.
Yeah.
I just remember
I haven't heard that one, but you're right.
And there was definitely a lot of like G dropping at the end of gerunds, like going, and like the vowels are interesting. I've never looked at like a vowel chart or studied the Utah accent that carefully, like phonetically, but it's so clockable, especially with like Sister Wives being on TV and like that. They really made that accent known. I feel.
And there are weird little. It's actually, as sometimes it can be very annoying, but having a podcast, people will point out things about my voice that I would have never noticed otherwise.
Like
and
what?
Something that someone recently pointed out is when I say a word that ends with ing, I put a K.
Thinking. I'm actually not quite sure why that is. The only other public figure I can think of who does that is Whitney Port. Do you know who that is? She was on the reality show The Hills.
Okay.
With Lauren Conrad.
I did watch
and
that.
And later The City.
I can think of her face now.
Okay.
Yep, I can think of her face now.
She is from California. She's from Southern California. But she does the same thing. She goes going, thinking. But I'm not sure. Maybe there could be a Western element there, but that just might be a part of your idiolect. Have you heard that term before?
No.
That's just like the totally one of a kind, unique way that you speak.
Oh, cool. I love that.
Your idiolect.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Like idiosyncratic.
Like just
that's just you.
That's just a me thing. Me and Whitney Port, baby.
It's just like maybe like a pretty girl suffix thing. Just own it.
I honestly, when people used to point things like that out to me, I would spiral and I'd be like, how am I going to fix this? And then I start thinking about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. And then it's difficult to speak because I'm thinking about how I'm saying what I'm saying instead of just thinking about what I'm saying. And now I'm just like, oh my gosh, cool.
You're
how
free.
Interesting.
You're so
I'm free. And I find it endearing about myself for these reasons you're pointing out and other people. And when people say you have a Utah accent, of course, that's where I'm from.
That's where you're from.
Of course I'm going to have a Utah accent. And I find that sweet because it's a marker of who I am and where I'm from.
100%. Yeah, I do. My husband and I are both from Baltimore. He has more remnants of his Baltimore accent than I do. I can't help but point them out. I literally am that podcast commenter troll for him, but it's only because it's like, it's so nostalgic. And whenever I hear someone in the wild with that accent, it's like my Baltimore crabby senses tingle, and I'm just like, oh my God, like you are one of us.
Yes, it probably feels so familiar and safe.
It does. It is an objectively kind of grotesque accent because it's like kind of Jersey and kind of Southern. It's a tough one, but it does instill such a sense of like sweet familiarity in me. And by the way, I get scores of critiques of my upspeak and vocal fry and just like the almost like gay man accent that I sometimes have on the podcast is because I'm a theater kid. So sue me. And I'm just like, joke's on you. I literally have a degree in why this is okay.
Yeah. You're like, I have the receipts, proof, timeline screenshots, as Heather Gay would say.
That's it.
Let's talk a little bit about cults.
Sure.
Why don't we?
Yeah, why don't we?
Because I love what you were saying at the beginning about the through line in your work is not only language, but power. And, talking about the gender dynamics of things. It's like which gender is in power. We're talking about classism, racism. And I think with cults, it's very interesting to think about language as power. What made you interested in applying the lens of language to cults in the first place?
Well, I mean, the deep reason is because my dad grew up in a cult. And so I had always had these curiosities and this line of questioning in me since I was a very little kid and first started begging him to tell me a story, not a made up story, but a story from your life. And then it turned out that my dad had
quite the story.
Interesting story he could have.
The story.
Which was in part that when he was 14, his father, who was very into the blossoming countercultural movement of the late 60s, moved my dad and his stepmom and two little stepsisters onto this compound in the Bay Area in California, which was founded as a sort of alternative drug rehabilitation center that extended to accommodate so-called lifestylers or people who just wanted in on this experimental compound way of life. And the group was called Synanon. And it doesn't really exist anymore. It disbanded in the early 80s after a scandal involving the leader, Chuck Diedrich, and this personal militia that he had assembled out of paranoia and power abuse and all the things at that time, placing a rattlesnake in the mailbox of a lawyer that had been defending or helping some of the ex-followers sue Synanon. These ex-followers were known as splittees in the vernacular of Synanon. You did not want to be a splittee. That was like the worst thing you could be. The militia, this personal militia to the cult leader, they were called the Imperial Marines. So already we're getting into some like special jargon that was very emotionally loaded for people in the group. But this lawyer, Paul Morantz was his name, was helping some of these very brave splittees sue Synanon. The Imperial Marines put a rattlesnake in his mailbox. It bit him. He went to the hospital. He almost died. Chuck Diedrich, the leader, was arrested, but he never went to jail because of his health and whatever. But that was the downfall of Synanon. But during its heyday, it was seen as this like absolutely life-saving, and for some it was. For some like addicts it was. But this absolutely life-saving way of life that, was centered around this nightly ritual called the game, which was framed as this very confrontational group therapy technique that like really worked and really, broke down people's egos and connected them. But it was actually just like a quite traumatizing means of social control. And yeah, my dad spent 4 years there. He wasn't allowed to go to a normal school. Kids lived separate from their parents in these like dismal barracks miles away. They weren't raised by their parents. They were raised by PODs or parents on duty, and they were taught not by teachers, but by demonstrators or people who were going to demonstrate how life really worked. By the way, my dad escaped every single day to hitch a ride into San Francisco so that he could attend a normal school, which was super against the rules. But he was like, I need a freaking education.
Yeah, he's like, this is not going to cut
This is not it. But
and what formative years too, from 14 to 18, right?
Yeah. And now all of that is, behind him, but of course still lives inside of him. And yeah, I just grew up on those stories. And the most interesting part of them to me was always the special language, PODs, demonstrators, in the game versus out of the game, splittees, Imperial Marines, love matches were the term for the marriages that Chuck Diedrich forced his followers to enter. He at a point, his wife died of cancer. He found someone new. He was like, that was such a character building exercise for me. I'm going to do the same to everyone else. And so he would like split up married couples, assign them new partners. It was a whole thing. But the special jargon and the euphemisms and the thought terminating cliches and just like the fraud acronyms and stuff always just felt like the clearest window into that world that I would never get to see.
Yes, and such a key piece of those worlds as well.
Yeah.
Why do you think that special jargon specifically, why is that so important in building these types of communities, building control, maintaining control, conformity? How does jargon work in that way, and why is that such a useful way of creating those kind of communities?
Well, it's kind of like what we were saying at the beginning of our conversation, which is that language is so taken for granted and you pick it up so organically that you don't even necessarily realize the profound effect that it's having. Language is one of the first things you pick up and one of the last things you let go. I remember one of the first interviews that I conducted for my research process for Cultish was with a Heaven's Gate survivor named Frank Lifford. And he was still, years after leaving Heaven's Gate, years after rejecting its ideology and recovering from the trauma, was still using the special names for his cult leaders, T and Doe, and was referring to the mansion that the cult followers shared as being in craft versus out of craft. And it was just so obvious that this lingo had yet to leave his system. But language is just such an easy, invisible, and commitment-free way to signal that you're a part of a group. It feels really good. It's like slipping on a new uniform, but you don't even have to buy anything. It's like shaving your head to show that you're a part of everyone else, but you don't have to get the razor out, Like it happens just so naturally. And yet it can very slowly take over your worldview. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard a high-ranking Scientologist speak, surely like someone of great authority in Mormonism having a conversation with some of their same status, an outsider probably could barely understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
It really does isolate you from the rest of the world. It can instill in you a sense that you have been imbued with divine wisdom, that you're special, that you have access to knowledge that other people don't. And it can be really tough to strip your vocabulary of those terms.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking too about how when you were talking about interviewing Franklin, was it?
Frank Clifford, yeah.
Frank Clifford. There are high-ranking Mormon authorities that go by elder is the name. The apostles go by elder, and then there's the prophet. And doing what I do, I will sometimes quote them or talk about them. And I've really made a concentrated effort to just use their name as opposed to elder so-and-so. But so often it's just Elder Holland. And I'm like, no, Jeffrey R. Holland. And I'm like, even that's kind of a weird way that the apostles, they have that middle initial and you say the middle initial. So I'm like, Jeffrey Holland. And there's all of these layers, even in saying the name of that one individual man. There's so much baked into that.
It's true. It's so true. The naming convention thing, it's like such a signal of identity change. Yeah. And the thing too, though, is that it's fun to learn jargon. It's fun to use it. Like maybe some listening will remember how it felt to learn how to speak Pig Latin on the playground. Like you are not saying anything that can't be said in regular plain old English, but you immediately feel so cool for knowing how to use this like secret gibberish. It makes you feel intellectually superior, socially superior, maybe even morally superior. It is fun to learn new terms. Even like getting a new job and learning like the acronyms and like the ways that people talk. I mean, cringy corporaties like gives me the ick, but when you get a new job and you're excited about being a part of this new team, it can feel really fun at first, and you might not necessarily realize the ways that language is being used to ensure conformity, to shut down independent thinking and questioning. I mentioned the term thought-terminating cliche earlier, which is kind of a hallmark of cultish language. This was this concept that I came across. It was a phrase coined by a psychologist who's still alive, a psychiatrist rather, named Robert J. Lifton. He's in his 90s, but he coined this term thought-terminating cliche to describe a sort of stock expression that's easy to memorize, easy to repeat, and aimed at shutting down independent thinking and questioning. And it is like a hallmark of tyrants, or any sort of cultish leader, politician, a hardcore business leader who resembles a cult leader. Like, they all have these. And in Synanon, the go-to thought-terminating cliche was act as if. And that was basically like shorthand to mean if you have a question or want to express some pushback, you don't quite understand a protocol or a rule or why something is done the way it's done in Synanon, someone would hit you with act as if, which essentially meant just act as if you fully internalize and support this idea, because eventually you will. It is a Chuck Diedrich idea, and he is all-knowing. He is divinely wise. Eventually you will understand. It was like fake it till you make it, act as if, but it had a much stronger undertone. Do you remember any Mormon thought-terminating cliches?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I have a very specific one for you that I wrote down, because in reading Cultish, that was one of the things that stuck out to me the most. In thinking about, I also love in Cultish, a quick aside, I love the way that you argue for cults being on such a spectrum.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's in the name, cult-ish, right?
Yes.
And I think that's so useful, especially as someone who has deconstructed from what some people call a cult, what other people call a high demand religion, what some people think is just a religion. It's very useful to realize that it can be somewhere on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, it enters, okay, yes, cult or no cult, but there can be cult elements of it. So I really appreciate that idea of cults living on some spectrum. In Mormonism, the first one I thought of, this was said by Dieter F. Uchtdorf, Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf, an apostle in 2013. Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
Oh, yes. I remember you sharing this on, it was either
Somewhere.
your podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
Yeah.
Doubt your doubts. Yeah. Yeah. And that's gonna be catchy because it has this repetition of the word doubt. It's easy to remember. It has all the trappings of a thought-terminating cliche.
I was curious with that one. We know that smart people join cults, right? It's not a measure of intelligence if you end up in a cult or not. Why are these thought-terminating cliches, why are they so compelling, even though with that one step back, it pretty clearly is like, oh, that's actually kind of discouraging critical thinking.
Yeah.
How are they still so compelling to people, intelligent people?
So many reasons. First of all, they alleviate cognitive dissonance. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that sickening internal conflicting feeling of, oh my God, I've sunk $100,000 and 20 years of my life into this group, and I'm starting to get the feeling that the promises made are not coming true. Oh, thank God somebody has served me with doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. That makes me feel better for a minute. Nobody, no matter if you have an IQ of 200, is really trying to feel cognitive dissonance for all that long. And so if there's like a little magical phrase that can make you feel better for 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years, great. So there's that. But more practically why they work is because of just certain cognitive biases that all humans have that these thought-terminating cliches really click with. For example, there is a cognitive bias that none of us are resistant to called the illusory truth effect, which describes all humans' tendency to believe something is true just because we've heard it multiple times. It's like our penchant for mistaking fluency for accuracy, or, familiarity with accuracy. So, memory scientists, including this woman that I have spoken to for some of my reporting named Lisa Fazio, have found that this particular effect, the illusory truth effect, can be found in people as young as 5 years old. It holds whether the thing that you heard was 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago. Every time you hear it, it sounds more and more true. And being aware of this cognitive bias doesn't lessen its impact. So you can know that it exists and still act as if, doubt your doubts. If you hear them enough, they're just going to ring true. There are a few other biases, like sort of language-related biases that can work in tandem with the illusory truth effect. One is called the rhyme is reason effect, which suggests that if a phrase rhymes, or relatedly, if it's written in beautiful, highly legible font, we're going to be more likely to perceive it as true. So studies have found that participants will rank the phrase woes unite foes as more truthful than woes unite enemies, even though they mean the same thing, just because one rhymes. So if you've got like a catchy, beautiful needlepoint psalm, maybe it rhymes, you've seen it hanging in your house, you've heard it a million times, it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter how wise you are, that is going to seem true.
Wow. There's also another thing said in Mormonism, because there's a practice where people go up and bear their testimonies, they call it, which I'm realizing that's kind of strange lingo too, to bear a testimony.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, they go up on the stand and they say, I believe the church is true. I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet. I remember learning growing up, like, you should mention these 5 things in your testimony. You should say you believe the church is true, that Joseph Smith was a prophet, that the Book of Mormon was true, that Jesus is the savior. And then there's one other one. And I also learned that a testimony is often gained in the bearing of it. And that reminds me of that effect you're saying, because it's not only you are hearing this repeated, you are also being encouraged to say it out loud.
Yes.
Often.
I mean, there is a reason why most religions encourage prayer, because language strengthens beliefs. And there's a theory in linguistics called the theory of linguistic performativity, which says that, and I kind of said a version of this earlier, but language doesn't just reflect reality, it creates reality. So like the most concrete examples of performative language would be a wedding officiant saying, like, I now pronounce you married, or an umpire in baseball saying you're out. Like, these phrases cause material change to happen in the world. Like, all that was done was words were said, but now something is different. But all language is performative. And I know that the word performative, like, on the internet can mean like you're just doing something for show, but this is a different meaning of the word. All language is performative. Now, in baseball, an umpire saying you're out is only powerful and inciting of change in the context of the baseball game. But in religion, saying, you know, I believe the Book of Mormon is true, is now like making something different in the world in the context of all of this life and all of the afterlife. So one could argue that religious language is the most performative type of language there is. It's like invoking everything, all of existence. And that is really powerful.
Yeah, it is creating a reality. And you pointing that out is a further paradigm shift, because especially when you grow up inside one of those communities, from as far back as you can remember, you're being given a framework for how to view reality. And it is through language. Yeah. It's ultimately all through language. And I think that's why deconstruction is such a identity crisis and even a reality crisis, because all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, all of these things I was told were just things that were told to me. It doesn't mean that they're objectively true just because they were told to me by so many people in my life.
Ugh, it's so hard. But yeah, I mean, you saying that reminds me, like, there's a reason why so many cults, cultish groups, high demand religion, like, pick your label, have like strict bans or limitations on what you're allowed to read, like what you're allowed to listen to. They don't even want the language entering your ears. You know, like, that's such a red flag. Like, if you join any group, maybe it's a religious group, maybe it's something else, if there are bans on like the type of media you are allowed to consume, that's proof in how powerful cultish language can be.
I was actually going to ask you about linguistic red flags for people. I think a lot of my audience I know, speaking for myself, I am very wary of being drawn back into a cult, whether that's a religion or even, you speak about a lot of different ways these cults show up, MLMs. And I believe, fact check me, anyone listening, that people who have been part of cults before are actually more susceptible to being pulled into things even like MLMs. There's a huge crossover between Mormons and MLMs, and even ex-Mormons and MLMs.
Totally.
So I wanted to ask you, and you've talked about some of these with like the thought terminating cliches and those types of things, but are there any more linguistic red flags to pay attention to for people who are trying to stay safe out there?
Yes. So when a piece of language incites a strong emotional reaction, makes you feel really special for using it, or makes you feel really relieved for using it, but kind of gets you to stop asking questions or to morally divorce yourself from some abstract, inferior other, that's kind of a sign that you might be in something that's a little too cultish for comfort. Whenever I hear a piece of language used, even in the wild, even if I'm not in like, I don't know, like a new agey environment or something like that, where like I can see that the person using this special vernacular might not be able to define what they're saying in plain everyday English. Just like, that's interesting. Like that language might only be there to show that like they're a part of this community. They have solidarity with them. They are like ideologically separate from those who don't use language that way. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like code red, like get the hell out of there. It is just something to note. And I find people using that language in the tech space, like the way that certain tech leaders talk about AI, the way that certain politicians talk about policy. Like there's just a lot of euphemism, a lot of really charged, vague language. Again, like special naming conventions. Of course, like rah-rah chants and mantras that are heavily repeated that literally like cause a chemical bonding in us and like reduce our stress chemicals, elevate our happiness chemicals, cause us to bond with people. Again, not every individual one of these linguistic features is a sign that you need to like run for your life. But when you all see them used in tandem, that paints a picture.
Yeah. Wow. That's very useful. And I'm thinking about, and tell me if you want to discuss this or not, Make America Great Again.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yes. And actually, have you ever watched the show Couples Therapy?
Is that the one with
Orna?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I haven't, but I do know who she is. And I've listened to her on podcasts before.
Yes.
And I absolutely should watch the show.
Yeah.
So I know the premise of it, but I have
was
not
watching the latest season, and there's a couple. This is a show that's literally just like a documentary where you watch people in couples therapy.
Genius. I can't believe I haven't watched it.
And I can't believe it didn't exist before. But yes, Orna is the name of the therapist, and she is mother. She's like such a badass. But and mother is sometimes cult language in the cult of Swifties or whatever. And also comes from drag speak. So anyway, it all connects. But there was this couple that she was treating in the latest season, and the wife in the couple is politically progressive and the husband is MAGA. And there were serious barriers to their communication that Orna had to help them through, because every time the wife expressed some distaste for a Trump policy, the husband would go, "She has Trump derangement syndrome." And that have you heard that Trump derangement syndrome?
But
it's like something that some MAGA people use to describe liberals being triggered by Trump. They'll just write it off as Trump derangement syndrome. You cannot be reasoned with or spoken to because you have this syndrome.
Wow. Speak of thought terminating.
Exactly.
Right there, yeah.
No, like literally it was a barrier to their partnership that they could not get past him labeling her, him diagnosing her with this pseudo syndrome.
When Trump got reelected, I found my religious trauma stuff so triggered. because and throughout Trump's presidency, and I will say, I will make a quick disclaimer before I say what I'm about to say, which is it also has caused me to self-reflect politically as well. So I don't mean to like just finger point, because I think I see myself doing this in another way on like a different side, you know, like I don't think I'm immune from it. However, I would see Trump doing these things that, I mean, come on. And then people defending it. And I was like, this feels so familiar to me. It feels like the way people treat a prophet in Mormonism, where they just find ways to justify certain behaviors because they've just gotten themselves so behind this person that it literally doesn't matter what that person does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, like another of the cognitive biases that plays into cult affiliation and the cult language is sunk cost fallacy. You know, like it's not just betraying this pseudo prophet, it's betraying yourself and your own decisions to go back and say, maybe I would have voted differently had I known.
100%. You are, it makes sense. You want to protect the decision that you made. So you're going to try and convince yourself the best you can that it's maybe not so bad as it looks, or people are exaggerating it. Trump derangement syndrome. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Like,
and then if you get hit with a phrase like that, again, it puts your cognitive dissonance to bed. You're like, okay, maybe it's fine until tomorrow.
Well, I'm thinking about Make America Great Again, to your point about things to be wary of, and realizing how vague that is, and how, do I want to make America great again? Yeah, of course. Don't we all? Wouldn't we? Not again.
Yeah, when was it good?
Yeah, you're right, actually. So minus the again, you see beneath that is maybe something a lot of people could agree with. Let's improve America.
Of course.
But when you say something that vague and that general, that can mean literally anything. What do you mean by that, right?
Oh, and this is not a slogan that Trump coined. Literally, Hitler was out here saying, make Germany great again. It is this weaponization of nostalgia for a past that never was.
That never existed. Yes, 100%. I want to shift a little bit to talk about swearing.
Oh, okay, delightful.
I loved what you had to say about swearing. You talk about it in Wordslut and kind of the gendered swear words and insults and things like that. But I wanted to ask about swearing within a moral context, because I feel like you discuss a lot that there is, you know, a perceived lack of intelligence for people who swear, and you push back on that. For some context, in Mormonism, there was this thing back in the day. They got, as you can imagine, ran into many copyright issues, but you could go to a specific video store and get DVDs where they had removed all of the swear words in a movie.
Oh my God.
And it was called, I think it was called Angel Vid. And then there was a Clear Play, which was like an actual video player that wowould do it for you. It was like this whole thing.
No way.
Then they got mired in lawsuits because they're like, you can't just like alter these
pieces of art. Yeah.
But it was so funny because you would get these videos and it would just bleep out the profanity, but it was like your mind would just fill in the gaps anyway. You know, it's like, what the blank? But Mormons care a lot. My point in saying all of that is Mormons care a lot about language, not so much about violence. And they also care a lot about sex, which is a conversation for another day. But I'm curious your thoughts on swearing being viewed as such a moral wrong, and why you think that might be, and what's behind that.
You know, I'm trying to think of it in because that's so funny, like the purified video thing. But what you're saying, I mean, that Mormon tradition just kind of sounds like a more intense version of what's already done in the entertainment industry and in the United States. Like, this is such a puritanical nation. And there's actually a great documentary about how the MPAA works that I can't think of the name of it right now, but I'll look it up.
That's
but
the rating system?
The MPAA is the institution that determines movie ratings. And as you can imagine, it is very sexist. You know, you can have like, well, I wrote about this in Wordslut. You can have the word penis in a show like dozens of times before you can have the word vagina in it just once.
Yeah.
And neither of those is even a curse word. Those are medical terms.
And probably same with nudity, right? Like boobs can be in it, but not a penis.
Yeah.
It'll,
For sure. But, and also like female pleasure is just so censored and demonized that like you can have like a man masturbating in a movie with it being like PG-13 or whatever, but if a woman is masturbating, now it's rated R.
Crazy.
This is not my wheelhouse, but like these are just, I've learned these things through the grapevine. But yeah, I think just in general, this is an extremely puritanical country that is very sensitive to language that will not allow you ultimately to ascend whatever hierarchy you're trying to ascend. And for secular Americans, that might be the corporate ladder or, like some wealth in some way. And it's like, oh, people of that class level don't use profanity like that in polite society. In Mormonism, you're ascending a more spiritual ladder. But ultimately, I do think it has to do with class and hierarchy and power.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's essentially like within the Mormon context, it's like a virtue signal, right? Of not only am I not going to use those swear words, but even in our home, we would never allow a movie that had that. We would never allow that word be uttered within our home, whether that's in a movie or we're speaking that way.
And a lot of cults throughout history have had very particular viewpoints on swearing. One that comes to mind is the Children of God, this church cult run by this guy named David Berg in the 70s. And this group was notorious because they engaged in this practice called flirty fishing, where women in the group would be coerced into having sex with outsiders as a recruitment tactic. And underage girls would do this too. It was really quite awful. But David Berg was trying to establish a new form of Christianity that was like cool and radical for this like hippie era in the 70s and 60s. And so he, like, as a reaction to the kind of like King James Bible English, he would swear a lot, like in a religious context, to show like this is the cool new Christianity for a new generation. And then, whatever, there was like a pendulum swing away from that, and that group was absolutely awful for a million reasons. But yeah, their swearing it's emblematic of like the American moral compass in general, and probably to more of an extreme in Mormonism. Yeah,
wow. I'm thinking too about how language, I mean, right at the beginning, you were talking about language kind of as an entry point to then, I feel like it's just so connected. And I'm thinking about being here now in California. I come from a Mormon background, and I know of a group. I've somehow ended up on this TikTok algorithm of a very trendy looking, I don't know that much about it, and I won't say the name of it, but a very trendy looking church in Orange County.
Okay.
And they do these videos on TikTok of what people wore to church today, and they're very fashionable. And the reason I'm thinking about that is I know that's not a language example, but it feels similar to that swearing thing where it's like, I don't know. I feel like maybe there's a bit of a stereotype of like modesty. Christianity.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, look, we're cool. We're hip. We're stylish. We're fashionable.
I joke all the time that I'm like accidentally a modesty blogger because like I'm covered head to toe right now.
You could be Mormon right now.
I could be
in
Mormon
this outfit
right now. Like I weirdly love to dress head to toe, but often it's like all see-through. Anyway, and I'm less Mormon dressing now that it's 100 degrees outside, but like the whole modesty thing harkens back to like the puritanical stuff. It's like this dog whistle for, and that's why I'm laughing, because I'm like, am I a Christian dog whistle right now? Because I'm literally like in so much fabric.
Are you here did you wear Mormon garments today just for this occasion?
I don't even exactly know what they look like.
They actually are tank tops now. They recently changed them.
What were they before?
It used to be a cap sleeve, so you could not wear tank tops. And there's been a huge uproar because very like quietly and without much explanation, they changed the cut of the garment. So they're tank tops now. So Mormons can now wear tank tops, which has never been the case in the history of Mormonism.
Are they all white?
They're all white. Yeah.
I mean, a white tank top, like, yeah. I want one.
Honestly,
are they cotton? Like, what are they made of?
They're cotton. The problem is they're so tight. So you're wearing like a tight layer.
Oh.
And then a lot of times the cut of them is such that you can't just wear a tank top over. So like women will be wearing the tank top garment. I'll see this on TikTok as well. There's like garment influencers who will be like, you know, get this tank top off Amazon that you can wear with garments. They'll be wearing the garment tank top with a tank top over top that covers the garment because you don't want your garment showing, and then a tank top over top of that. I know.
Oh my God.
I'm like, I'm hot just thinking. Well, I did it myself. So I was also, yeah.
I'm going to look this up. I don't know why I've never thought to look up what they look like.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You could very easily find them.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, now I don't think I could get away with this, but before any of my books were published, I really wanted to go undercover at like a modesty conference.
Oh my gosh, how fun would that be?
That would be so fun for me. Maybe I still could.
You would maybe, yeah, I'm trying to think of ways you could like.
I would just have to use a
disguise
fake
it.
name.
Wig,
yeah.
fake name,
Oh my God, I love wigs.
sunglasses.
I have a wig that would work. I have a long blonde wig with bangs.
Do it.
I would love to.
I would love to hear your thoughts from
my
that.
like former theater kid training would come out.
Yes, put on a little character, a little trad wife character.
I have again because I have all the outfits.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Amanda, I could talk with you forever. The last thing I want to ask you is, you are currently working on a novel.
Yes.
I'm so curious. When does it release? Do you have a release date yet, or like a general timeline?
Not until early 2028.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we have some time.
Yes.
But I just wanted to ask you, with this thread of language and power, without giving anything away, of course, what has it been like using these concepts and these ideas, but channeling that through fiction, a work of fiction?
Thank you for asking. Because these themes are very present in this book, even though it's fiction. And it has been so fun to explore them in a world of my own making. The book is called Where to Put Your Tongue, and it's about a Hollywood dialect coach who teaches actors what to do with their mouths, how to speak in different dialects. But the title is also kind of a double entendre because she gets involved with this sort of not washed up, but like past his prime, cult followed Nepo baby director with a salacious secret.
Oh, so good. So good.
So all the themes that interest me most are front and center in this book. It's just that I'm thinly veiling a lot of the observations I've made in Hollywood over these many years to put my points across.
Oh my gosh. I cannot wait to read it. And I actually was going to say, that reminded me in course of our conversation at some point, I was thinking about, you were talking about language in groups, out groups. Being in LA, there's very much a lingo here.
Oh, it's so,
and I have caught myself embarrassed by like not referring to things the correct way and realizing like, oh God, now people know I'm moved here last month because I didn't say that right about which neighborhood I'm in, et cetera, et
Were
cetera.
you saying Los Feliz?
What is it? Los Feliz?
Feliz, like Felix with a Z.
Feliz.
Which is not how it should be pronounced in any way whatsoever. It's like such a trick.
I looked that one up, and there was actually some discourse on that online I saw recently where someone was talking about, I'll see if I can find it and I'll send it to you. I'd be curious your thoughts. But that's a perfect example where I'm like, oh gosh, now people are going to immediately know I'm not from around here.
No, it's okay. But there is Southern California. There is such an insidery dialect. And guess what? I freaking love using it because I am in the cult of East
oh my gosh.
Los Angeles.
Well, and now I'm thinking too with this book, I'm thinking about Hollywood and all those dynamics. I'm sure there's a lot of that within that world as well.
There really, really is. And it's fun too to be able to channel my interests and my everyday conversations into this character who is not me at all, thank God, because she's making some bad choices, but little thoughts and little conversations that I've had that I think are interesting about language, I'm able to like give to her, and that's fun.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to read it. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
I'm just so happy we got to do this.
Me too.
So grateful for your work. And I know the listeners are just going to be eating this up. So thank you.
A delight to be here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Bye.
GIR